right. So good evening, everyone. Welcome. We are thrilled that you are with us tonight. I'm Dinan Messiqua, and I'm the Northeast Regional Representative for the International Dyslexia Association. Um, and we're so glad that you're here. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know about two upcoming events that we have. One is going to be our next webinar, which is going to be on Thursday, March 7th. And it's going to be on how to create change in schools, going from balanced literacy to structured literacy in the gen ed classroom. And we will focus on a specific school in Somerville that did this with very few resources. And the webinar is very exciting, and it's about change and how to create change and that it's doable. Our next event is very exciting. It's an in-person event, which will be Saturday, April 6th, and it's our annual spring luncheon and our annual members meeting. And it will be at Fitchburg University. It will be on a Saturday, and there will be a session, an in-person workshop on structural literacy. We'll have a luncheon where we will present the Garside Award, and then we will have another session in the afternoon on accommodations for students with reading disabilities. And each of the workshops will be an hour. So there will be a save the date going out for that, and there will be a minimal cost for the April 6th event. A little bit about my background. I am a special education consultant. I was a special education teacher for a long time. I now help parents navigate the special ed system. I also consult to schools with regards to early literacy, K to 5. And I will let Charlotte introduce herself.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Charlotte Lunde. I'm a certified speech-language pathologist and literacy specialist. I'm also a certified structured literacy dyslexia interventionist. I have about 20 years of clinical experience. I'm on the board of directors of IDA Massachusetts for about 10 plus years, and I'm currently serving as vice president. I have a private practice in dyslexia in the greater Boston area. I do work at a school for the deaf. And in addition to clinical work, I also teach at the graduate level. So thank you everyone for coming. All right, let me just make my screen bigger. Okay, so let's go over the agenda for tonight. We're going to go over the key building blocks to structured literacy, targeting these skills in the classroom, and we're going to touch on planning instruction and tracking progress. We are asking that you're welcome to put questions in the chat, and we're going to hold the question and answers till the end of the presentation, just for the sake of time. Okay, so structured literacy, best practice. We're going to talk about the components of structured literacy. So structured literacy should be systematic, planned, it's sequential, systematic and sequential instruction. It's multi-sensory. We're going to go through all the components tonight, but they're really working and integrated together at the same time. Explicit, so nothing is left to discovery. Concepts are directly explained. It's cumulative. So, you're always spiraling back to previous lessons and old learning as you're introducing new concepts. The importance of scaffolding, because you want to have the children, the students, be able to demonstrate the skill. So if the child needs scaffolding in order to demonstrate that skill, you want to provide it. Instruction should be differentiated, so matching the instruction to different needs. And we were talking about this the other night, that it's really important that when you differentiate instruction, that the student doesn't feel that it's differentiated, that they feel like they're doing what everyone else is doing, but it's to their level, to match their level of need. And then we always want to be collecting data, because data drives our instruction, and it's a way for us to monitor progress. Okay, next slide. So these are the components of structured literacy that we're just going to touch on tonight. It's only an hour, so we're going to be doing a brief overview of phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, text comprehension, speaking and listening, and then written expression. Okay, so let's go over phonemic awareness a little bit. So phonemic awareness is an essential building block for reading and spelling. It can and should be taught and learned. It's the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate individual sounds or phonemes in spoken words. And sometimes people interchange these terms, but phonological awareness is the greater umbrella on this term. So you have phonological awareness, and then one component of phonological awareness is phonemic awareness. There's other components like rhyme, syllables, for example, clapping out the syllables in words. Those all fall under the umbrella of phonological awareness. But tonight we're focusing on this one stem, phonemic awareness. Okay. So types of phonemic awareness activities. Phonemic awareness is not done with print, it's done through the air. So you would say things like phonemic isolation, for example, recognizing individual sounds and words. So what's the first sound in man? Phoneme identity, recognizing the same sound in different words. So ball, baby, and big all start with the B sound. Phoneme categorization is another type of phonemic awareness activity, recognizing the word in the set that doesn't belong. So pig, pink, fun, which one starts with a different sound. And then phoneme blending, that's when you blend the sounds together. So p, I, g, blends together to make pig. Okay, next slide. More phonemic awareness activities. So phoneme segmentation is breaking the sound up. So how many sounds are in the word crab? K, r, a, b, 4. Phoneme deletion. You may say to the student, say the word farm. Now say it without saying the sound, and you want them to say arm. Phoneme addition, making new words by adding a phoneme to an existing word. So add the k sound to old. So you say old, now add the k sound to make cold. And phoneme substitution. So you have a word like ran, and you want them to change the n sound to a t to make rat. So you're substituting out the last phoneme. So these are just examples of activities that you could do to build phonemic awareness. Blending and segmenting phonemes is so important. It's a critical skill for being able to learn how to sound out words, decoding, and spell, encoding. So those two types of activities, they're all important, but those two in particular are extremely important. And we want to keep in mind that students with language or learning differences may need more visuals to supplement phonemic awareness activities. And we're going to show a couple videos. But a lot of the, in school, they might have you do an activity through the air, and that's fine, meaning you're just saying it and the students are giving a response, like the example I just gave of say farm, and the child says farm. Now say it without the f sound. I don't have anything in front of me, but it can be more accessible sometimes if you do use visuals in conjunction, not print, but using visuals, okay? So I went to the IDA conference a while back, and these presenters here I have noted on the slide, they had some great phonemic awareness activities that were very fun. You know, sometimes we think of their drill, and they can be, and it's beneficial to do drill, but it's also really fun if you can make it into games and make it feel like play. So one example they gave, these were kindergarten activities, was doing duck, duck, goose. This is kindergarten. And you show the child a picture, the child that's going to stand up and tap his friends. You might show them a picture of a rabbit, and the child has to think about, how am I going to segment that out? And they do rabbit, rabbit. And when they're ready to select their friend to chase them, they blend it back together, rabbit, and they tap that child on the head. So that's a fun way to do segmenting and blending that doesn't feel like a drill per se. Another example was to do silly chicken noodle soup, And so you sing the kid with the kids and you tell them that you're going to make chicken noodle soup and that you're going to have silly vegetables in the soup. So you'd say, you'd have them sing, and forgive my voice because I'm not a singer, but chicken soup with noodles, chicken soup with rice, add some silly vegetables, and we'll make it really nice. And then you pull out, whatever the manipulatives, let's say a carrot, and the child has to say, Barrett, carrot, or carrot, Barrett, and then they put it in the silly soup. And then you pull out another vegetable, broccoli, and they put it in and you stir it up. So you're substituting a phoneme to make a silly vegetable, and it feels just like a fun game. Okay, let's take a look at this video. Let's see, the sound might be off there, Dinan. I still can't hear it. I don't know if do you think it's because your headphones?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to start that over. Apologies.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Billy's hungry again, okay? He wants something to eat. Okay. This time he only wants to eat food that starts with the B sound. Okay, so let's see what we have. Turkey, cheese, corn, popcorn, bacon.
What do you say?
Bacon. He wants food with a B sound.
A bus.
Pizza.
Right.
You know what that is? Broccoli.
And say bread.
We have 2 cheese.
Cheese.
French fries.
Banana.
Steak. Hot dog, your
Hot dog.
favorite. And beans.
Beans.
Okay, let's see. Do we have any food that starts with B that Willie will like?
Popcorn.
What does popcorn start with?
P.
Oh, P.
You want B?
He wants B. But so that's not going to work. Let's get rid of that. But how about bread? But do you want bread? Yeah. Yum, 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 yum. Okay, let's see if we can find another one. Grapes. Does that start with the B sound? No, get rid of that. Okay, we can go to the next video.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. So Willie's hungry again.
Oops,
Okay?
sorry.
He wants something to
Okay. Sorry, let's go. Here we go. All right.
All right. Sebastian, we're going to play with the farm, okay? Now, we're going to put the animals inside the farm so they can go to sleep. Okay, so we're going to open up the farm and we're going to put the animals inside so they can sleep. Okay?
And in here.
You can put them in here and here. You can put them in the top or the bottom.
Okay.
So I want you to listen. I want you to listen for what animal am I talking about? When you hear the animal, you can put it inside. Are you ready? I want you to listen. Are you ready? What animal am I talking about? Pig. Hey, good job. Put the pig inside the farm. Good night, pig. Have a good sleep. Okay, you ready for the next one?
House.
Okay, listen again. Good job. Okay, you can stop it there. So you see he's listening to, I've segmented the sounds out and he has to blend them back together to figure out what animal I'm talking about. Okay, go to the next slide.
Okay.
All right, Sebastian, we're gonna
So thank you, Charlotte, for telling us what phonemic awareness is. And that's a good segue into another component of structured literacy, which is phonics. So people often ask, what's the difference between phonemic awareness and phonics? So Charlotte was talking to us about phonemic awareness, which has to do with sounds. All the activities that one can do with phonemic awareness, you could do with the lights out. You could close your eyes, and what you need are your ears. You don't need your eyes for that. Unless you use manipulatives like we saw with that little boy. But in general, it's something you can do with your just your ears. Phonics has to do with matching sounds to letters. So the letter A says the sound ah. And there are predictable relationships between letters and sounds, and we teach those to students. We connect the sounds with the letters or groups of letters in an alphabetic writing system, and that's something that you typically start with in kindergarten. And typically, in preschool, you could be starting doing phonemic awareness activities so that students develop an awareness of sounds and words, and then you're going to match those sounds, onto letters in kindergarten. Phonics is effective when it's taught systematically, where there's a scope and sequence of the letters that you teach students, and you directly teach them the sounds of the letters. So that's important. It's not something that's random and we're just going to learn the alphabet song and we're going to leave it at that. So here's a sort of a graphic showing us the difference. So phonemic awareness, we said, is sounds. Phonics is letters, right? We need our eyes. Phonemic awareness you can do with the lights out. Phonics, you need to see the print. So for example, if you have the word, I'm going to go down here to this diagram down here. If you have the word kite, kite starts with the sound k. There are actually 4 ways that you can represent the sound k. You can represent it with a K, a C, a CK, and a CH. We have to teach kids, what does kite start with? It starts with a K. There's a reason why it starts with a K and it doesn't start with a C, because if it started with a C, it would make it a soft C and it would say sight. And we teach those to students gradually. So this graphic is a good representation. The sound N can be represented in 4 different ways. And you're not going to teach a kindergartner that the sound N can be spelled GN or KN or PN. That comes later. You're going to start with N because that is the most common way you spell the sound N. There's a reason we start with certain letters. It's because you get the most bang for your buck. So we talk about phonemes, which is the smallest unit of sound in speech, and English has 44 phonemes, which can be mapped on to graphemes, right? Which is the written representation of phonemes. So that is the difference between phonemic awareness and phonics. The great thing about phonemic awareness is that you can start doing phonemic awareness activities when a child is 2 or 3. Like you can start with fun rhyming activities like Charlotte was saying. Kids love to play with sounds. It's fun. It's like they just love it. It's a game for them. And you can start doing that with children from a young age, and it actually will help their reading development later on. So when we think of phonics, there's a certain progression and scope and sequence to how we teach phonics. And this graphic shows us the red is 1st grade, the green is 2nd grade, and the blue is 3rd grade. We go from simple to complex. And what I want to say before I get into this graphic is this is not the Bible and the be-all of end-all of phonics progression. You will see different scopes and sequences that vary somewhat in the progression of skills. But in general, this is a good representation of, in general, when you start with phonics, you're really going to start with, initial sounds of the words, final sounds of the words, and the middle sound. And we typically start with what we call closed syllable words. So CVC, like a word like cat or pig, where there's a consonant, vowel, consonant. And even though this blue here, which is they're saying is 3rd grade, has all of the syllable types, you would teach closed syllable in kindergarten and in 1st grade. After closed syllable, you're going to move on to open syllable, which is where you have just a vowel and, I'm sorry, you have a consonant and a vowel, like the word hi or no or go. And then you're going to move on to more complex syllable types, such as silent E and R-controlled and vowel teams and consonant and LE. The progression of these matters because you really want to be in sync with where's the child at. And you don't want to go too fast. You don't want to go too slow. But what's wonderful is that if a child knows closed syllables, so for example, let's say they know pig, they can read the word pig and they can read the word pen, then they can probably, you can teach them multisyllabic words like the word pig pen, right? You can start teaching them compound words and you can start teaching them words that have both closed and closed syllable types. So multisyllabic words typically, you know, when kids are in 2nd and 3rd grade, it depends where they're at, but those can be those can start then. I'm going to move on to the next slide. So phonics, it's really critical that phonics be multisensory, and that it's a structured language approach. Structured language approach to reading and writing in a systematic, rule-based way. And what we mean by multisensory is it means that you're not just going to talk to the kids and assume that they understand it. So for example, if you're going to teach the vowel sound, you know, A says as an apple, you're going to, you know, there are lots of programs such as Lively Letters, you know, where you're pretending to hold an apple and says as an apple, I'm biting off the apple. You're making it more multisensory for the students to help them remember the sound that the short A makes. Reading programs that are research-based are such as Orton Gillingham, Wilson, which is based on Orton Gillingham, Lively Letters, which comes from the Learning Channel. I think is that the Learning Channel or Learning Center? TLC. I wasn't sure, Charlotte. Do you know?
I
I can't remember, but Lively Letters is comes from TLC, and it's a wonderful way for children to learn sounds and letters. Project Read, which has components of comprehension, but they also have a whole phonics program. And then UFly is the University of Florida Literacy Institute, which has a wonderful reading program, and has lots of has a wonderful scope and sequence to teaching phonics. So now we're going to go on to, we talked about phonemic awareness, we talked about phonics, we're going to talk about word ID and word attack skills. So what does word ID mean? So when we think of reading words, we're going to think of sort of 2 broad categories of reading words. There are words that are what we call, so word ID is really reading or naming real words without deliberately sounding out the word each time. And typically, you know, there's a lot of names that people use for word ID. Some people say sight words, some people say trick words. It gets very sort of complicated in the jargon, but I want you to think of word ID as words that are very common, okay, common words that students see. So for example, the word the, and, is, was, you know, commonly that they see in text. And we really want, some of these words are phonetics. They can sound them out, like the word in, and some they can't, right? Like the word give is not a phonetic word. It doesn't, we don't say give, we say give. It doesn't follow our silent E rule. But the important part is that students get practice with being exposed to these words and are told when they're trick words, like the word give, are taught that they're a trick word and that they just have to memorize them. And that once students, even in kindergarten, can learn words that are open syllable, like the word go, but they learn it as a sight word. And then later they'll learn it's an open syllable. But to expose kids from a young age to these sort of sight words, because they're so common, and you really want these to become automatic because it will help them when they're reading text. Word attack skills is the ability of a student to sound out or decode words. And it's often measured by giving the students nonsense words or words that are new to the reader, because the student can't guess at the word and they can't rely on their visual memory and think, oh, have I seen this word? Wait, do I remember? Does it look like that? They can't rely on that because it's a word they've never seen. So this is when we talk about decoding, this is where you can see if a child has good decoding skills. You want to be working on both word ID and word attack. One thing that I've seen sometimes in schools is that sometimes there are teachers that only are working on the decoding skills because they're sort of like, they're thinking, oh my gosh, I got to just do decoding. I'm doing structured literacy. I can't, we're not going to work on sight words. You need to work on both, because if you only work on decoding, the rate at which the kids are going to read is going to be laborious. You want to have the automaticity piece is really important with very common words. That's why I said at the bottom, you want to really practice both daily. So fluency. So now we're going from the word level to connected text. So in connected text, what does fluency mean? Fluency is the ability to read text accurately with appropriate rate and prosody. It doesn't mean reading fast. It means reading with the appropriate rate based on the text. Fluent readers read effortlessly, right? They're not putting all their energy into decoding the word, into breaking it up. As they're reading, they're comprehending the text, which means that they're able to add expression. They know where to pause, and they understand what when you think about syntax, subject and predicate, they understand the parts of the sentence. When you're a fluent reader, you're not concentrating on decoding, and therefore you can focus on what a text means. I do want to say, I actually was talking to a parent the other day, and we were talking about their child and reading fluently. And what we know is that if a child is reading below 100 words a minute, their energy is going into decoding the words. And so their energy is not going into comprehension. Research has shown that in general, when a child reads above 100 words a minute, their pacing allows them to they're reading fluently enough so that they're able to start thinking about what they're reading. So that's important to remember when we think about reading rate. So what are activities that can help with fluency? One is, and I find this very effective with students, is you model to them how to read a sentence. Obviously, it depends how complex the sentence is. But for example, if the sentence is, when I'm working with young students, if I say, Jack sat on the mat, Jack sat on the mat. I pause after the subject of the sentence, and then I give the, did what, or who he, Jack did what. He sat on the mat. So modeling to students where to pause in sentences is actually really helpful. And then eventually later we teach them why we're pausing there, subject and predicate, is important because it helps with comprehension. Have students participate in repeated oral reading. It is so helpful when a student reads a passage that is at their instructional level, which means it's not too hard, but not too easy, for them to reread it more than once, because that's where the automaticity piece is going to come in. So some other examples of activities. So we just talked about student and adult reading, right? You can trade off with reading, oral reading. You could read sentences together, like you could read, a small paragraph together. Have partner reading, trade off. And then we have Fisher drills, which some people also call RAN-RAS charts, which RAN stands for rapid automatized naming, is also a term that we use today with, so And what this is Fisher drills and RAND-RAS charts are, you can think of fluency. Fluency is not only at the connected text level, but it's also at the word level. So for example, if you have like a 5x4 and you have rows of words and we're focusing on the short E sound, you might have these words in a row like wet, gem, pep, set, leg, and the kid reads these words across these rows and gets fluent with it, and you have them do it more than once. It's actually extremely important if you want to see progress in fluency. You want to be working on fluency skills at the letter sound level, at the word level, at the sentence level, well, phrase level, sentence level, and connected text level, right? You don't want to think of fluency as only paragraphs. One thing is when the teacher says, and this is what this part in red is, when the teacher says to the students, okay, now go and, was it drop? I think it was dear. Is it drop everything and read? I remember one of my daughters used to have that at school, and they would say like, find a book and just read it. For students who struggle with reading, the problem when they're reading independently is it's good for them to read independently, but you have no idea if they're reading the text correctly or not. So just a caveat around like when you ask students to drop everything and read, we want them to be reading, but it's really good to hear students, especially students who struggle with reading, to read aloud, because you want to hear, are they reading accurately or not? And you want to be able to support them and correct them if they're making mistakes. So when we think of reading, there's sort of two broad categories of books. There are what we call decodable books. And this is books that are phonetic, right? The words are phonetic. Bob, b, a, b. You can sound it out. Bob can get the jet to go. All these words you can sound out. They're what we call phonetic words. So this is an excerpt from the JET. This is a series called Primary Phonics. There are many, 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 many series of decodables out there. More and more publishers are putting out what we call decodables, because we know that it's important that students get a chance to apply their phonics skills in connected text. And not just apply the phonics skills, but practice the skill that you're learning, right? If you're working on short vowel sounds and you're specifically working on short E, or here, this book, The Jet, is actually a review of short vowels in one syllable closed words. Then you want a decodable that focuses on that skill. The other piece is what we call rich text or authentic text. So for example, read aloud, audiobooks, and this is text that is not, controlled text, right? It's not going to be your decodable, but it's very important that students get access to this. So when you have a student, sorry, I'll pause for a sec. Decodable books, the focus is on reading the words. Rich text, the focus is on language comprehension and understanding, the text. And often it's content, whether it's expository or it could be like, for example, science, social studies, or it's going to be a narrative text. If a child is struggling with reading, they might not be able to access the text, but they should be given accommodations. So text to speech, really important. Audiobooks, really important. So that there's so much background knowledge and vocabulary that students learn from authentic texts. You don't want them only reading decodable text. You want to expose them to the authentic text. So for example, in a kindergarten classroom or in a first grade classroom, you might see the kids working on this, right, in their literacy centers. And you might see them later in social studies, the teacher is reading this text to them, right? So they're getting exposure to vocabulary, which Charlotte is going to talk about in a sec. I want to say one thing here, which is not here. Parents always ask me, what about graphic novels? Are graphic novels okay? So I'm going to just share my personal view. I think if children, if they're reading graphic novels and that's what they're interested in, and there's rich vocabulary in the graphic novels, and the themes, I think it's okay for children to be reading like graphic novels. I don't say no to that. I do think it's good for them to be exposed to books that are not graphic novels, so that, because not everything in life is going to have those pictures. But I do think that if a child is motivated to read graphic novels, I think that's great. I think they're reading, and that's what we want to develop.
Okay, so that's a nice transition to vocabulary. So we talked a bit about this just now, but vocabulary, we're referring to both oral vocabulary, oral language vocabulary, and reading vocabulary, and they both need to be worked on. Words needed to communicate effectively. So children learn vocabulary through many ways, but two primary ways are incidental learning. So that's overhearing. They're building their vocabulary through hearing things on television, hearing their parents talk, hearing their teachers, hearing everybody around them. So incidental learning of vocabulary and everyday experiences. But also the way that you gain more robust vocabulary is through your reading. And that's why it's so important that decodable texts are critical for learning phonics-based rules. But you also have to combine that, just like you just said, with rich literature so that you can build vocabulary, because you're not going to get that rich, robust vocabulary in a decodable text. But you are going to get it in rich literature. So you need to, that's the reason we just talked about combining them, because you build such vocabulary through reading literature. And when you're a struggling reader, if you don't have access to rich literature because you're struggling to read more complex text, it's so important that you have access through, like you said, audiobooks, or perhaps someone reading to you, or finding other ways to gain access at the same time, so that you can also build your vocabulary. Okay, next slide. And typically when we talk about vocabulary, particularly in IEPs, a lot of times we see things about tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 words. And I'm not sure how many parents we have tonight, but I just want to review what these are. So tier 1 vocabulary are your very common words that you learn first, you know, things like baby, walk, run, think. Okay, so those are tier 1 words. Tier 2 words are more complex academic words that think about, if a tier 1 word would be something like think, then a tier 2 word might be contemplate. So contemplate, I may pick that word up from reading. It's academic word. It's a more complex word, almost a synonym to think of to a tier 1 word. And tier 3 words are academic content-based words. So think of a word like, say, microscope or microscopic, or the word satellite, things that are connected to your academic core content that you learn in classes. Again, tier 2 and tier 3 heavily learned through reading. And then we talk about multiple meaning words. You know, a simple example, there's so many multiple meaning words in English. That's why it's often challenging, particularly for English learners. You know, you take the word run. I know that's a common example, but I might say, you know, I'm running at the gym, you know, physically running. Oh, I have to run to the store. I have a run in my nylons. My nose is running. The refrigerator's not running, it broke, you know, so there's so many multiple meaning words. And so again, we pick those up incidentally, but also through reading. Same thing, figurative language, expressions that we use, idioms. And sometimes you'll pick those up incidentally, but a lot of those figurative language expressions and idioms are through reading. And then structural analysis. And again, these things need to be taught. You know, we talk about being, one of the first slides, explicit. So we need to directly teach these things. Structural analysis is huge. This is the study of prefix, suffixes, root words. And I think in the past we focused a lot on this in older grades, but it's so important to start doing this in elementary school through high school, working on structural analysis. This is the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to learning vocabulary. There's only so much vocabulary you can be directly taught, but if you can be taught what a prefix means, what certain suffixes mean, you can build your vocabulary so quickly. So structural analysis is a game changer if you can be teaching these things for building vocabulary, but starting early. You don't need to wait to high school to start doing this. You should be doing this elementary through. Okay. Okay.
So comprehension. So why do we read? What is the goal of teaching students the sound of letters, teaching them how to decode words, teaching them how to read sentences and then text is comprehension. That's the ultimate goal. So comprehension, just like we talked about reading words should be explicitly taught, comprehension should be explicitly taught. We want to teach students how to monitor their comprehension. So this is about that sort of meta piece of being aware of, as they're reading text, they're asking themselves questions. And what can we do to help students with that? Giving them visuals to organize their thinking. Graphic organizers, very important, especially because that translates to understanding the text, but it also helps students in their own writing, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Answering questions as they're going along with the reading, asking questions. As important as answering questions is generating questions. Oh, you read the sentence. What questions do you have about this sentence? Who's the sentence about? What happened? Why do you think this happened? Understanding that text structure varies depending on the kind of text. So if you have a narrative story, like a once upon a time kind of story or story that's fiction, versus expository, which means more informative text. So if somebody's writing about the blue jay and it's the habits of this bird, very different kinds of writing. And we need to explicitly teach students that the structure of the text varies. And again, because this will also translate to their writing. One thing I want to say is that when students are younger, we read them stories, right? We read children's stories. And then there's this big jump that typically happens when students go from learning to read to reading to learn, which typically happens in third grade, where there's a big influx of expository text. And mostly in middle school, high school, adults, most of what we read is expository. And it's a big jump for students, and it's really important that we teach them different text structures. Another really important skill to teach is summarizing. How do you summarize? How do you summarize a passage in 3 sentences? And you don't get lost in the details, and you see the forest through the trees. So important skills to be explicitly taught. So when we talk about narrative and expository text, there are programs such as Story Grammar Marker, which teaches how stories are constructed. Project Read has both story form, which is how, you know, it follows sort of the structure of a story. And they also have a program called Report Form, which teaches students how expository text is constructed. And those are 2 really good programs. When we teach these, and when we teach any skill, we always want to follow 3 steps. The first is model, which is I do, teacher do, or parent do. Guided practice, which is we do, and application, which is you do. And you always want to follow these steps. And when a student is struggling, for example, in application, the you do, like they're not able to do it independently, you come back and you go back to guided practice, right? So there's always this scaffolding piece, which Charlotte talked about earlier. And now I'll hand it to Charlotte.
Thank you. The next, someone has their hand raised in the chat. Let me just see, just take a minute to see. Do you mind typing your question in?
And yeah, we'll do questions. We'll answer questions at the end.
Sure.
Thank you, Betsy.
So the next slide is speaking and listening, which, oh, just one back.
Sorry.
So I just, we're talking about all these things working in conjunction at the same time. So oral language is the foundation for literacy. And almost all poor readers have some early speech and language delays. And this comes from the work of Tiffany Hogan at the Institute of Health Professions. And this isn't a webinar about diagnosis, but I think it's worth just taking a minute to say that 50% of children with developmental language disorder have dyslexia. So that's a big number. Okay, so you can have DLD, you can have dyslexia, but 50% of children with developmental language disorder have dyslexia also. So the reason I'm emphasizing this is that it's really critical that you have the speech language pathologist involved if you have someone who is struggling with their reading. That you need to have information about their language, and you need to have their language tested. Same thing if you have a child who's struggling in their language, you need to have their reading evaluated. So it's just of critical importance that if you haven't had that language assessment, you really need to have that, because they are both deficits in language, but they're different. So that's what makes it tricky, is that DLD and dyslexia are both rooted in language deficit, but they look different. Okay, so that could be a whole webinar in itself. And I have to say, if anyone's interested in that topic, Tiffany Hogan has a podcast that focuses a lot on DLD, so you can check that out. But anyways, looking at developing oral language competence. So you want to have strong oral language, and you want to do things to promote oral language development. So these are just some examples. Listening to text read aloud, role play situations, always expanding and elaborating ideas and discussions, working on formulating sentences, combining sentences, working on developing more complex sentence structures. Of course, you do that orally, then you work on that in your written language as well. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I'm just going to touch on this just very briefly. Again, a lot of these topics could be whole webinars in of themselves, but when we talk about written expression, there's all different types of writing. Of course, the two umbrella written expression we talk about is expository and narrative. So whether that be you're telling a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and there's a problem and how it gets resolved, or you're doing more expository writing, which we think of often with academic subjects. For example, I don't know, you're writing all about an animal that lives in a rainforest or something. You're doing something factual, content related. Regardless of the type of writing, you're working on formulating phrases, sentence, paragraphs. Spelling is so important within written expression. Handwriting fluency. Even with the technology today, it's still critically important about handwriting fluency, practicing letter formation. And things we talk about for editing and learning: punctuation, capitalization, usage, organization of one's writing. These are all really important things to directly teach the students. Okay, next slide. Okay, so, this is an hour discussion, but we want you to have resources for planning instruction and tracking progress. And Florida Center for Reading Research, they just have it all. They have so many great resources. So for example, if you click on that link, they explain all the components of reading. So let's scroll down and let's click on, for example, fluency. If you're like, okay, wait a minute, what was fluency again? It tells you the definition of fluency. It gives you resources. And if you scroll a little bit further down, it gives you videos. Dinan was talking about, choral reading earlier and partner reading. If you're not sure what that looks like, they have videos here. So you could click on the video and they show you what choral reading looks like. They show you an example of partner reading. So this is kind of a way for you to learn each component where seeing it in action. Let's go back and let's click on that second link. They have lots of resources also for collecting data because you want to be tracking progress. Does a certain student need more intervention? Is the student right on track? And so you find what you're assessing. For example, in this case, phonological awareness, but they have other data sheets for fluency, for phonics. You find what you want to assess, and they have a sheet right here. So what's so great about this is you don't have to recreate. These things are already made. And if this is a new area for you, if you scroll down to the bottom, they have the term. So you might say, I'm not sure what was segmenting again, and it will tell you what the definition of that was, so that you can take the data on here. So you don't have to invent your own tracking sheets, which is really nice. And the other thing, and Dinan is going to go through this, is that they have lots of activities. So I'll have you explain that.
Yes. So this is exciting. So the Florida Center is fabulous, really good website. So so for example, let's say you teach a certain grade or you have a child in a certain grade and you're like, what activities could I do? They have student-centered activities. And what you'll notice is on the left-hand side of this page, they have from pre-kindergarten all the way through till 5th grade. They have different activities. So for example, this is the 4th and 5th grade student center activities, but you could pick any grade up here. And you have activities in advanced phonics, activities in fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And you pick which area you want to work on. And within each, you have all these different activities. So for example, we will show you one that we picked. So this was a sample lesson. It's an affix game. Affix means suffixes, prefixes, sort of an overall term for suffixes and prefixes. So this came from those activities. So this is called, this is under vocabulary. It's called morphemic elements, so affix game. And you're looking at, you have a game board and, whoops, sorry about that. You have a game board and each of these, what you notice is that the game board has prefixes or it has suffixes. And they have all these instructions about how to play this game. So you do need to print out the game board and you do need to have, pieces. They'll tell you what the materials you need, but you don't have to come up with the games, which is great. So it's a really useful site because they have so many resources. So the other thing that parents ask us a lot about and teachers are, what are some apps that I could use that help with reading? So on the actually International Dyslexia Association website, there's a link there and you scroll down and there's a list of apps that are worth considering: sound literacy, beginning sound interactive game from Lakeshore, and there's lots of apps. So feel free to look at those. Though these are the references for our talk today. So a lot of references, a lot of really good resources. Sorry about that. So that is the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to answer questions in just a minute. I just want to say something because I know people had questions about 3 things. One was, can they get a certificate of attendance? 2, people have been asking us, can we get the slides? And 3, can we get this recording? So the answer to getting a certificate of attendance, if you want a certificate of attendance, or if you would like a PDF of the slides, please email Charlotte. So this email right here, charlottelund.slp@gmail.com. Please email her and we will send you a PDF of the slides and or a certificate of attendance. So that's important for you to know. The recording, we are recording this, and it's going to be, the link to this recording is going to be sent to all the people who registered for this webinar. So if you are here tonight, it means you registered, and you will get a link to the recording. The recording is going to be put up on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, well, we're going to look in the chat. I don't think, let me see. I'm just checking.
I do want to read, someone had put in the chat that fluency, accuracy, rate, reasoned phrasing, punctuated expression, and prosody, this is the bridge to comprehension. And I said, yes, like, thank you for putting that in the chat. That is just, I like the way you wrote that, and that's true. Fluency is the bridge to comprehension. And I think sometimes fluency does, sometimes it gets put to the side. You know, we get focused on phonics and decoding, and we never want to forget the importance of fluency and how much it builds comprehension strategies. So thank you, whoever, it's anonymous attendee, whoever put that in the chat. Thank you. Yes.
Definitely. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to say also one thing is that if, you know, we sometimes in structured literacy, people think, oh, structured literacy, is all about phonics, and it's all about the letter sounds, and it's all about decoding and just decoding the words, and it stays there. Structured literacy is much more comprehensive than that. And as Charlotte said, it has all these components that make up, there are like 6 components that make up structured literacy. And ultimately, the reason why we're looking for automatic decoding, decoding has got to become automatic, so that children can read fluency and can get to that comprehension piece, because again, that's the ultimate goal. So it's just really important to always remember, why are we doing this? Like, why, what's the end game here? The end game is for you to be able to read and to understand what you're reading and to enjoy reading. So I also wanted to say that if people have our contact information here, so you are all welcome to take down our emails if you have questions. We have other webinars coming up. As we said at the start, we have a webinar March 7th about how to create school change and go from a balanced literacy approach in a school to a structured literacy approach. How do you do that without a lot of money and few resources? And it is doable, and it is very achievable. And we're going to talk about a case study of a school in Somerville where this happened. We also have our annual spring luncheon, which will be April 6th in Fitchburg. Very excited about this. It's our first annual spring luncheon since pre-COVID, and it will be at Fitchburg University, and we will have a workshop on structured literacy, and it will be in person, and then a luncheon, and then we'll have a workshop on accommodations for students with dyslexia. And we will also be presenting our Garside Award at our luncheon, and it will be at a minimal cost. And a save the date will be going out soon for that. So please keep your eyes open for that. So if there are no more questions.
We have one more question. Can we take one more question? We had someone ask about phonemic awareness instruction in the dark, and that things have changed in incorporating letters. And what I want to say, I think what you're asking, I think what you're getting at is, so phonemic awareness is without letters, but what I think what you're getting at, and which is important to point out, is I think past thinking people thought we can't get onto letters, we can't do phonics until we've mastered this. And That's right. We don't wait for that. You're doing these things in conjunction. So you can be doing letter-based activities with students, phonics-based, while you're still developing phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. But if you're doing phonemic awareness activities, they do not have print involved. But you're not waiting to do print activities until that's mastered. You're doing them in conjunction together. I thank you for asking that, because I think that that's important.
Yeah, very true. That all of these components that Charlotte mentioned at the start, the phonemic awareness, the phonics, the fluency, the vocabulary, all of these things from the get-go, right in kindergarten, you can be doing all these things, and they all happen in conjunction, and ideally they would be integrated. So for example, if you're working on E, the sound E, well, when you're doing the handwriting, we're working on the letter E. So it's the flip coin, right? The decoding and encoding are they're connected. They complement each other, and it's just the other side of the coin, the reading and the spelling part. So and thank you so much for the person who brought that up about phonemic awareness. That definitely you want to do that in conjunction with phonics. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. We're thrilled that you
everyone.
were here, and we hope to see you at our next webinar. Good night.